week in June. And any questions that you might have, we're going to have time at the end where we're going to open it up for questions. So please let us know if you have questions, and we'll get started. So the agenda today, we're going to discuss Roadcheck, a little overview of the CVSA inspection levels. So there are 8 inspection levels. We'll go over those. We're going to review the results of last year's Roadcheck. We find that Roadcheck results year over year are very, very similar. And though the focus was different last year, I expect more of the same results this year. And I'll show you why in a few slides. We're going to go over the procedure that the CVSA inspectors follow when they do an inspection on one of your vehicles. And then we're going to overlay that with the process that your driver should go through to support the CVSA procedure. We'll do a little wrap up, and I'll tell you about some additional material that we're going to send out along with this slide deck. So this year for Roadcheck, your drivers and our drivers are all going to see 10,000 CVSA certified inspectors on the road. They're going to primarily be doing level 1 inspections. Again, we'll talk about that in a few slides, what that means, but their trucks need to be sound from today. When inspected, they should get to inspection. It'll be a 72-hour blitz. Steering and suspension is the focus, but again, the whole vehicle will be inspected. It'll be anywhere in North America. Canada and Mexico also participate. So if you're crossing the border into Canada, you could be inspected there as part of the blitz. And the dates are June 4 through June 6. There are 8 inspection levels. Some inspections will start as a level 3 inspection. You'll see this is a driver-only inspection. It typically just reviews the driver's hours of service, his driver's license, his medical card, etc. It's in-cab only. If there's an issue found there, many times that level 3 inspection will be elevated to a level 1 inspection, which would be considered a full inspection. There are some other inspection levels. We're going to focus on these 2, and I'm not going to get into the detail of what these other 6 inspection levels are. They're much less in terms of scope. The scope of a level 1 inspection is a full driver and vehicle inspection. Last year during Roadcheck, the timing of Roadcheck last year, it's always in June, but it was 6 months after the ELD mandate went into effect. So the focus last year was hours of service. However, only 3.9% of the violations that occurred were on drivers, and 2% of the drivers were put out of service for hours of service. And that trend holds. If we go back year over year, we see that those numbers hold pretty steady. There were 67,000 plus inspections completed last year. Over 48,000 of those were level 1s. 67% of the inspections were level 1 and out of service conditions. 20% of all of the out of service vehicles were brakes. So these brakes are a big deal. Tires and wheels, 19.1%. So the vast majority, I think that totals like 64% of the out of service conditions were for brakes, tires. If you put lights in there, you're upwards of 70% of what the out of service conditions would be. And that was isolated to Roadcheck, but those numbers are very consistent with what we see the rest of the year. What that tells me is we need to make sure all of our drivers are ready for a full level 1 inspection. Since they focused on hours of service last year, and a very small minority of the drivers were put out of service for hours of service, the vast majority of the out of service conditions resulted from vehicle issues and maintenance issues. So that's what we need to be prepared for. So what I'm going to get into is a little bit about pre-trip inspections. We think it's your best defense to survive a, whether it's a inspection at Roadcheck or through the rest of the year. There are a number of reasons that it's your best defense. Safety is obvious. We want to make sure that not only are our vehicles safe, but everybody else with us is safe on the road. It can be very dangerous to go out with a load that's either improperly secured, brakes that are damaged and not working properly, wiring that's faulty or damaged, lights that aren't working correctly. It's not safe for your driver or anybody else around the vehicle. You obviously have legal implications for not performing a good pre-trip inspection. If, God forbid, something were to happen on the road, and all of us safety guys, we always say this, that it's not a problem until it's a problem. But when it's a problem, it's a big problem when you're in court. So we need to make sure that our drivers are doing a very thorough pre-trip inspection in order to defend your interests following an incident. It's also protecting your operation. If you have something as simple as a tire blowout, because your driver didn't inspect his tires very well or at all, you're looking at delays. Now, we always support our customers on the road with our road rescue department. They're very, very informative for your drivers. They're there to support them 24/7 if they have an issue. But it still means delays. It still means that it's going to take 40 minutes to get a tech to your driver's location to, conduct the repair and get your driver rolling again, which means customer service issues for you or your customer, because they need their product, whatever it is that they're transporting. They're doing that for a reason. And to let something that's as easy to catch as a bad tire slow that down, it's not the best plan, obviously. Always best to do things right the first time. And that carries over into a financial arena as well. If you've got a tire that is worn out, you bring it to an AIM shop, you're under a full service lease, we're going to replace that tire for you. You're not going to have any cost. On the flip side, if that tire blows out on the road, there's going to be a service call on the road, the cost to repair or replace the tire, and any ancillary damage that could occur during the blowout. Things that happen very frequently is damage to the rim. So if you blow out a tire and you need to replace a rim, you're looking at a couple hours of downtime and probably at least a $700 or $800 bill for something that you should have had no cost for, should your driver have found it prior to going out. In addition to the financial and operational issues, you've also got the pre-trip inspection is the best systematic way for your driver to prepare for a roadside inspection. He's going to go through the same procedure during his pre-trip that the inspector will go through at a roadside inspection. So you want to make sure that your driver is capable of conducting a solid pre-trip inspection, that he's going to spend 15 minutes. Some guys are going to spend an hour doing a pre-trip inspection. At least a 15-minute pre-trip inspection is mandatory at AIM for our drivers. During the inspection process, it's important that your drivers know what to expect. It's a human interaction between your employee and the law enforcement officer conducting the inspection. So first impressions are very important. You want your driver to know what he's talking about and not have a bad attitude with the inspector, obviously, and put him on his heels immediately. So the new drivers, the inspectors tell us they can spot them a mile away. As soon as they pull up, they know that guy's new. When he jumps out of the truck, he doesn't know what to say. He's nervous, very anxious. With just a little coaching with that new driver at orientation, you can teach them what's expected during an inspection. It's a lot different than getting a speeding ticket or getting pulled over in a regular vehicle. Whether you're in a commercial vehicle or a regular four-wheeler, those two things are very different. So that driver needs to know what to expect. He doesn't have the experience. An older driver, someone with more experience it's old hat for them. They're going to go through the process and have no issues and be very comfortable. But the new driver definitely will be nervous. Over the road and local drivers are different. They're treated differently in the inspection, and every inspection is different. They're going to have different types of equipment and different operating characteristics, and they're going to be looked at differently by the inspector. And they're trained to look at those issues differently and to look for different red flags. The inspections typically take 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the level of the inspection. As a side note, it should be logged as on-duty time on line 4 for the driver's log. The inspector may or may not ask him to do that, and he may or may not give him a violation for that if he doesn't do it. So that's something to watch for. The reasons for the stops they vary. If there's a traffic offense, if your driver's seen, a gateway violation like speeding or failure to yield or a lane violation, those are all reasons to be pulled over, and they require probable cause. The inspector needs to witness or observe him, committing the offense, and that could result in an inspection. Size and weight restrictions. If you've got a heavy truck on a restricted road, that's reasonable suspicion and reason to pull your truck over and possibly inspect it. But a driver can be pulled over and flagged for an inspection for no reason whatsoever. If they're just pulled over for an inspection, the officer doesn't need a reason to pull that truck over or to pull them in at the scale house. Just that he wants to inspect the vehicle. That makes that new driver nervous. He needs to know that there may be nothing wrong. And when it takes 45 minutes or an hour, a new driver is going to get more and more nervous as he goes because he doesn't even know why he's been pulled over. Sometimes there's an issue with the carrier. Elevated CVSA scores or ISS scores, which is the inspection selection system, which is used at the scale houses. When those scores are elevated, you'll see a higher frequency for inspections. So when those numbers are elevated, it's best to let your drivers know what to expect. This is the CVSA Level 1 inspection procedure. The whole slide, all 37 points are part of the inspection procedure that the CVSA goes through. Now, the red box denotes the Level 3 inspection that's driver only. The full 37 steps are what they go through for a Level 1. We're not going to go through the details of each one, but I am going to go through those first 12 and talk a little bit about those. And then we're going to do some general statements about the remainder. Steps 1 through 4, choose the inspection site, approach the vehicle, greet and prepare the driver, and interview the driver. This is the first thing that the inspector will do during the process. So they're going to choose the inspection site by choosing when to pull the truck over. If they're going down the highway, they're not going to pull them over on a hilly or curvy section of highway, and they're going to choose their spots, so to speak. When they approach the vehicle, they're going to be courteous with the driver. They're going to let them know what to expect, and greet and prepare the driver and let them know what's coming. During the interview process, they're going to collect some documents. We'll get into that a little bit as well. So what the reaction from our driver should be is, as soon as they know they're being pulled over, they should turn on their four-ways. They're going to want to stop their vehicle in a safe and controlled manner and pull it off to the side of the road in a safe place. Again, the place to do that is not on a curve or at the bottom of a hill where oncoming traffic might cause problems for the driver or the inspector. You want to keep everybody out of harm's way. It also tells the inspector before he even pulls over that he has a professional driver ahead of him. Once he's stopped and he's safely off the road, also should note, a soft shoulder on a road is no place for a heavy truck. So they want to look for level ground that's as solid as possible. Once stopped, they should stay in their seat. Last year during Roadcheck, there were about 750 seatbelt violations issued. Some of those could have been drivers that unbuckled their seatbelt as soon as they were pulled over to reach for documents or do whatever, or just relax waiting for the officer to approach. Leave their seatbelt buckled. They should keep any corrective eyewear on so that the officer can see that they were wearing it, and avoid those types of violations. And then they obviously want to set the tone with the inspector as soon as possible by being courteous, cooperative, and show that they're prepared. If they've done a thorough pre-trip, that will get them prepared. They'll know what to do. And they should know the details of their operation. They should know where they've picked up, where they're delivering, what their cargo is. They should know the name of their carrier and so forth. None of those questions should go unanswered when the officer poses them. It tells the officer that they're knowledgeable and professional. So the next thing the officer will do is collect driver's documents. They're looking for their CDL, their medical card, shipping paperwork. They want to make sure that they don't have hazardous goods, and if they do, they want to make sure that the hazmat paperwork is within reach of the driver from his seat. So a good best practice is to utilize the permit books in trucks that are issued by AIM, or if you've got your own vehicles, to have a permit book assembled and in a location that the driver can reach without exiting his seat. He'll examine the driver's license, check the medical certificate of the driver. That'll tell the officer if he needs corrective lenses or if he's got any other health concerns. Sometimes drivers are limited to staying within a state if they've got, for example, high blood pressure or other issues. It'll all be noted on their documentation. Carrier ID, they need to know who they're working for. Surprisingly, we hear from law enforcement that some drivers don't know who they work for. And at AIM, we frequently get violations that are written with AIM's DOT number, AIM Leasing's DOT number, which is 332295. And generally that results from a driver that didn't know who he worked for, and the officer will go off of the registration in the truck or the DOT number on the door. If it's a rental truck, it'll have that DOT number on there. That's not typically where those violations belong. So the driver needs to know who he works for, which seems crazy that you'd have to train a guy on who he works for, but some trucking companies are organized under multiple DOT numbers, and they need to know what DOT number they're operating under. If it's a rental contract and you've rented a truck from AIM, you want to make sure that the contract's no more than 30 days old and that it shows your DOT number on it. Next steps, 10, 11, and 12, we're looking at the duty status of the driver and his DVIR history, if he's got one. So the duty status is going to be, now that we're in the ELD world or AOBRD world, the driver needs to know what his device is. Assuming that he's got something installed in the truck, if he's using an AIM supplied geotab unit, that would be an ELD. There are devices that are on the market that are AOBRDs that are going to be phased out towards the end of this year. The driver needs to know if he's got an ELD or an AOBRD, since those devices differ from, a regulatory standpoint. The rules are different for an ELD versus an AOBRD. Driver needs to be knowledgeable of how to use his device. We've seen violations from drivers for not being able to do things as simple as send their logs to law enforcement officers when requested. And user instructions need to be in the truck as well. All of that information will be checked during this inspection. 8 blank log pages, another requirement for the driver. Even though he's on an ELD, the driver needs to have those 8 pages of blank logs in case he has a malfunction with his device. If he's claiming to be exempt, he needs to know why. Typically, it's the 100 air mile radius rule. And if the driver is operating in a local capacity, he needs to know why he's exempt, not just, yeah, they told me I don't need an ELD. That won't usually help the situation if the driver doesn't understand the rules that he's operating under. The federal annual inspection, there are far too many violations written for that every year. Usually we see 1,000 violations for no federal annual or an expired federal annual inspection. For AIM, that sticker is placed on the driver's windshield. Many times when the inspection occurs, the window's rolled down and they forget that it's there. And they can't find the sticker, and they're looking all over the truck for the sticker, and it's on the window, which is rolled down to talk to the officer. So let your drivers know that it's there. They should have checked it during their pre-trip inspection to know when it expired. If they did that, they'd know it was on the window. And if there were any DVIR defects from the previous day, they would want to review those as well. The next slide, I'm going to go through some general issues with that. Steps 14 through 36 are all very specific, truck parts that are listed. Inspect the left side of the trailer, inspect the left side of the tractor, and so forth. I'm going to give you some high-level review of major things that need to be looked at. So no air leaks. You don't want air leaks of any type. Audible air leaks are something that inspectors will readily find. No fluid leaks. These are all very basic things for a driver that understands the pre-trip inspection. They all merit reminder at this time and continual reminder for our drivers to do a good pre-trip. If we see a truck parked in our yard and there's a puddle of oil under it, we can be pretty sure that the driver's not done good pre-trips and that the truck shouldn't leave until it's gone through a shop to know that it's in good order, that oil didn't come from that vehicle. Tires need to be in good condition, properly inflated with adequate tread depth. I've shown here the DOT minimums for tread depth. AIM standard is 1/32 higher. So 5/30 seconds for steers and 2/30 seconds. We'll replace those tires if they come through our shop and they meet those standards. Make sure that the drivers are doing a thorough brake inspection. So they need to test their braking system. I'm providing, along with this slide deck, a detailed procedure on how to do a brake test to make sure that the warning light, the warning buzzer, and the tractor and trailer protection valves are functioning properly to make sure that those systems are working as they should. If the driver does that every time they change vehicles, which is get in their truck for the first time in the morning or drop and hook a trailer, then they can be reasonably sure that their truck is holding air as it should and that their brakes are in adjustment. Normal driving doesn't always adjust the slack adjusters on a truck, so this brake test will accomplish that. All lights are working, that they're the correct color, that they're visible. They need to make sure that their lights are working. Obviously, an officer can see that when they're driving down the road and they could be stopped for it. It's definitely a gateway violation that can cause an inspection, fines, CSA points, and further delays in a route, and no broken glass. Those are some high-level things that they can look at. To get into a little bit of detail on brakes, because that is one of the major violations that we see, or one of the most frequent violations and most common out-of-service conditions, is we don't want any loose parts on a braking system. Everything should be tight. You don't want oil saturating your brake liners. You certainly don't want any cracked brake pads or parts. Audible air leaks throughout the system, whether it's the lines between the tractor and the trailer or any other brake lines, you don't want them crimped, heat damaged, or broken in any way. Slack adjusters generally should be equal in length, and the driver should observe that in his pre-trip inspection. Air chambers should be the same size on each axle. Any holes, broken springs, chafing lines, anything of that nature should all be resolved before the truck goes on the road, and if found in inspection, could put the vehicle out of service. Tires, wheels, hubs, another class, high frequency class of violations. Make sure your tires are properly inflated, that you've got appropriate tread depth as discussed. One of the things as part of the suspension component and steering component of this focused inspection blitz is that the tires aren't contacting the vehicle. Obviously, if the tire is rubbing the vehicle in some way, the most common place that it would rub is on the pitman arm, and generally that results from an improper tire size or from a steering system that's been altered to tighten the steering radius. If you have exposed fabric cords or belts in the tires, all conditions which should be resolved before going out on the road. The rims, if they're cracked, if there are any bends, if the holes in the rims that the lug posts come through, if they're elongated, that's indicating that you've got loose lug nuts. Any fresh metal around those holes also is an indicator that you've got a loose wheel that should be retorqued or looked at by a mechanic. If the hubs are misaligned, and obviously if they're leaking lubricant, all very easy to spot for an inspector, and also equally easy to spot for a driver. Specific to the focus group, we've got the steering and the axles and the suspension components. They're the focus this time. We're going to send you some information that last year, of the 67,000 inspections that were done, there were only about 1,000 vehicles put out of service for this type of issue. So it's a relatively low occurrence. I would expect the same, even with the focus on these components this year. I would expect a relatively low out of service rate or even a violation rate for any of these components, because a well-maintained truck shouldn't have these issues. A truck that's 5 years old or less shouldn't have worn out suspension components already in the way that you would find in an inspection. You don't want to see anything loose in a suspension. Your tie rod ends you shouldn't be able to push and pull. There shouldn't be any give in those, only rotational movement. Probably the most common one out of this group is power steering violations. The wheel should turn freely, but we see if there's a power steering fluid leak, again, very easy to spot for the driver, and that's probably the most common violation of this group in roadside inspections. Leaf springs, U-bolts, axle positioning parts damaged or loose. Those are all things that the driver should be looking at with a visual inspection. They should be able to identify those. Welded and repaired components. The saying for suspension components is "thou shalt not weld." If there's anything welded in your suspension, it should be reviewed by a mechanic to make sure that it meets standards. But they should not be welded in most places. Certainly not the pitman arm, and that's probably the most common place where you'll find a welded part, a welded repair. If you've had repairs done on the road, you might find things that are done like that to get the truck back up and running. They need to be reviewed by a mechanic. But no free play in tie rod ends or any other components in your suspension. One thing that they're going to measure, that they will measure that you may not know, is wheel lash. That is the amount of free play in the steering wheel, indicates worn components in your suspension and steering system. One of the attachments that we're going to send out is got the chart for X diameter of steering wheel and how much free play should be allowed. You want to measure that by turning the wheel all the way to the right or left, marking that with a reference point inside the truck, and then moving the wheel until you have perceptible movement of the front tires. Once you have that, you stop and you measure that distance. And it's going to be somewhere or in the neighborhood of 2.5 inches or less, and depending on the size of the steering wheel. That's something that will be measured. That's excessive lash. If you've got a lot of free play in your steering wheel, it should be reviewed by a mechanic. Airbags are probably the most common suspension component. The airbags can wear out over time, and they need to be inspected by your driver. But that brake test will also tell you if you've got air leaks there. BLT. Most of you probably know what I mean. It's not lunch. It's brakes, lights, and tires. If the guys are looking at that stuff, you're probably going to succeed in your roadside inspection. If you look at the BLTs of trucking, those are your that's 70% of your violations. It's 70% of your out of service issues. If you can make sure that your drivers are doing those things right, you're going to succeed in Roadcheck. Even though we have a focus this year on a group that not everybody's as familiar with in suspension and steering, brakes, lights, and tires are still going to be your #1 violation in Roadcheck. Some of the additional info, I mentioned some of it. I'm going to give you a detailed driver brake test procedure. Get it out to your drivers. All of these things are really good handouts for your drivers. Well, maybe not the last one, but certainly the driver brake test procedure. Get it in the hands of your drivers. make sure they do it every morning before they leave, after their 10-hour break if they're on the road, and every time they drop and hook a trailer. Once they drop their trailer and they hook to a new one, they've got a new brake system. They need to test that just like they tested the first one in the morning. If they're serious about safety, they'll want to know this information. We've also given you in Jessica's original invitation to this webinar, it included a link to CVSA, and these documents were linked in. I'm providing them to you here again. They're going to give you more detail on brakes, lights, and tires, as well as the steering and suspension issues that we've talked about already. But in the interest of time, I didn't want to go through every bit of detail. I wanted to hit the high notes. But the brakes, lights, and tires, I can't stress enough. Drivers need to be reviewing those. All right, I'd like to open up for questions if we've got any. Jess, do we have the ability to open up for questions? I should have asked you that before we got started, but I didn't.
Yes, we do. So if anyone has a question for Ron, you just have the ability to unmute yourself, and then you can go ahead and ask. Any questions for Ron?
They're letting me off easy.
All right, was there anything else you had, Ron?
No, ma'am, that was it.
Okay. So I'm going to email everyone following this meeting. It'll probably be within the next hour. It'll be a copy of the slideshow presentation with all of the forms that Ron referenced throughout. And so if you have any questions, I'll include Ron's contact information along with my own. So if you have any questions regarding this presentation, or if there's anything AIM can do for you, please just feel free to respond or reach out to us. Ron, thank you so much for this presentation.
If there's anything that's specific to their operation they want to talk about, they should not hesitate to contact me, and I will either give them an answer immediately or get them one that's specific to what they do.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you very much, Ron. Great job.
Thank you.
And we'll have a new webinar next month. So please join our series as we're trying to inform and educate and keep everyone in the loop with what's going on in the industry and with AIM. Thank you all.